acts of the Office of the State Attorney, improper or unlawful conduct by some employees or officials of the Office of the State Attorney, unlawful appropriation or expenditure of public funds or property as well as unlawful, irregular, or unapproved acquisitive act, transaction, measure, or practice having a bearing upon state property, intentional or negligent loss of public money or damage to public property, contravention of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, and that is the Act of 2004, and the unlawful or improper conduct which has caused or may cause serious harm to the interests of the public. The proclamation was gazetted last month. The investigation will help the Department of Justice to lay to rest concerns that have been raised by members of the public, the legal fraternity, and other government departments regarding the functioning and conduct of some officials within the Office of the State Attorney. Where appropriate, and in addition to the investigation by the SIU, disciplinary action as well as criminal investigation will be initiated against alleged perpetrators to ensure that firm action is taken to uproot corrupt activities. We therefore encourage anyone who can assist by providing useful information to avail themselves to the SIU to assist in the investigation. In addition to these interventions, I have last year initiated, under the leadership of the current CEO of Legal Aid South Africa as project manager, a review of the policy and legislative framework governing the state legal services, particularly the role of the Office of the State Attorney and other legal services in government. This is intended to develop a new, comprehensive and more effective system of provision of state legal services at all three spheres of government so as to enhance its efficiency, effectiveness, and professionalism. This, in part, is in response to the shortcoming I have already identified earlier, as well as findings and recommendations of the report of the Public Service Commission and by other stakeholders regarding the functionality and performance of the Office of the State Attorney. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minister.
No, I'll answer questions.
Thanks. Let's immediately go to your questions. You will identify yourself, introduce yourself, and institution from which you come. And let's if possible, avoid the spring of questions at once. Are there any takers? If during Women's Month, we start with that.
Ministers, thank you so much for being forthright with the problems facing the Office of the State Attorney. The question I have for the head of the SIU is, what is the timeline for this investigation? Who's heading this team? And how big is the team investigating? How big is the investigation in general? General, you haven't really commented so far as to how this has affected you with her. I'm Minister of the Labour at the time. Is there anything that you picked up with regards to the Ministry of Police?
Well, there you have it. Ministers Michael Masuta, Bheki Cele, as well as Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi on the presidential proclamation authorizing the SIU to investigate corruption allegations leveled against the Office of the State Attorney. Stay tuned to SABC News for more on that story. Well,
Minister Masuta, also just a timeline on when this overhaul or this review of the State Litigation Services, when is that likely to be concluded? Thank you.
Thanks. Let's take the gentleman there.
Good morning, Ministers. Barry Bateman, Eyewitness News. Could you just comment or provide additional details related to this figure of 80 billion rand that we saw in weekend reports, that is an estimated amount that has been defrauded from the state so far? Could you give me an idea of how did we reach that figure, if that figure is indeed accurate? And then could you touch on the modus operandi of these individuals, the collusion between private state or private law firms and the state attorney's office, how they managed to get that money out of the state? Thank you.
Ministers, if you don't mind, shall I check with Cape Town if you have a question?
Yeah.
But we just do it. Cape Town, do you have a question?
Yes, we do.
Please go ahead.
Tamal Khan from Business Day. My first question is to the Minister of Health. Minister, could you please provide us with an update on the scale of the medical legal claims facing the state? The last published figure, I think, was for the end of March last year. Do you have an update on that? You know, what's the scale of the problem that you confront? And can you, I'm not sure that this is a question to the Minister of Justice, could you please provide some specifics? How many cases are being investigated? Which are the private law firms that are implicated in this? How many people, lawyers, you know, some specific cases and law firms, please?
Thanks. Over to you, Ministers.
Do you want to start, SIU?
Is it on?
No, thank you very much, Ministers, Honorable Director, and members of the media. The question directed to me was around the timeline of the investigation and how big is the team that will do the investigation. As you are aware, that the proclamation has been recently gazetted after being signed off by the President. The process that we do follow afterwards in kicking off the investigations formally is obviously that we put together the team, and the team does a further assessment of the allegations and the scope, further assessment of the scope and the focus areas. In this case, focus areas will probably be, the offices that are to be prioritized, the offices of the state attorney, and the areas within their business processes that we focus at, be it settlements, be it default judgments, be it any other process based on the allegations that we have received. So in terms of the timeline, we are anticipating that this investigation is going to cover across the country all the offices of the state attorney in the 9 provinces based on the allegations that we have received. So you'll understand that it's quite complex. So we are giving the investigation team not more than 12 months, but in the event that there are allegations that we keep on receiving, we will obviously not turn a blind eye on those. We will continue to investigate, but so that we saw finality on those allegations that we have received earlier, we will then issue an interim report to the President with clear outcomes and clear actions that needs to be taken against any of the identified individuals or firms of attorneys. How big is the team? At the moment, we've put together a team, a multi-skilled team. That team consists of the members that have pure investigative skills, forensic investigative skills, that is. We've got the members that are lawyers, and I have emphasized to the team that because we are dealing with an attorney's firm or investigation into the attorney's office, We do have employed within SIU those members who are admitted attorneys, so we would have to have the team being beefed up by those members who understand the attorney's office business, so that from end to end, we have to map first what is the business process that is followed by the state attorney's office. Obviously, we'll have to engage with the state attorney's office themselves to understand if there are any standard operating procedures, what is the law applicable to their processes, so that we can engage and be able to investigate where is it that there is a presence of maladministration or malpractice or any other infraction of the law that we may come across. We do also employ members of the team who are chartered accountants, because in the process there might be a need to quantify some of the numbers that we need to quantify. Already there's a question from the floor in terms of how is it that we've quantified some of the numbers. So it is important that we get the skills within the team that is able to then quantify the numbers that will come across. So the actual number of the team members we'll probably finalize it in the next week or two. But in the process, we are continuing just with the scoping and engaging the appropriate offices, just so that we do not waste time. Those are the questions that really were directed at me, Program Director. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Seeing that I have this non-paid job of moving the mics, can I ask Minister Mutale to be in that order to be the next?
I thought you are wanting to move them, but you're still doing so.
No. It's no. I'm saying that in a particular.
Okay. Yes. Please. No, it's okay. Thank you very much. The question directed to me is, what is the scale of the claim against the Department of Health now? We collate these figures at the end of the financial year. So the figures I'm going to quote are for the last financial year. They are not. We did not incorporate anything for this year. So at the end of that, it was 56 billion, 960 million, 200,088 rand. This is not the money that has been defrauded or paid. It's what has been claimed. In other words, when you calculate the total number of claims, if the state was to pay them today, all of them, assuming that they are all correct, legal and legitimate, then the state will pay 56 billion, 960 million, 200,088 rand. Thank you.
Just to amplify on the timelines question, to indicate that you'd notice that in the statement we also allude to the fact that where appropriate, other corrective measures would be taken, including criminal investigations leading to prosecutions, as well as disciplinary action against affected officials. So it's going to be a multi-pronged effort. But over and above that, it may well be necessary for us to, for example, use tools such as extradition and mutual legal assistance, where it is necessary to go beyond our borders. As you are aware, we are responsible for generally for securing those kind of cooperation initiatives with other countries where that becomes necessary. So depending on what the preliminary investigations direct us to, we will go wherever. When you do spring cleaning, you don't leave certain corners and nooks, because that may well just be where the cockroaches are hiding. So you make sure that wherever the broom, wherever the feather duster, wherever the mop takes you, you go there. So it would be difficult, as the SIU head, Advocate Mutiba, has indicated at this stage, to be, definitive about how long it will take. I think we will allow the process to unfold, see the preliminary reports where they lead us, and judging from the scale, enormity, and complexity of the issue and the various interventions that will need to be taken, that would give us a better picture. The issue also of the ballpark figure. You see, the claims, for example, the 56 billion that Minister Motsoaledi has alluded to, may not necessarily all be accounted for as fraud and corruption per se. So the investigation is intended to establish that fact as to how much of that amounts to undue and unlawful claims made against the state. And as you know, the role of the SIU is to recover losses incurred by the state. So the investigation would be to establish that fact in order to determine which of these monies were due or are due to the state and should be recovered. Now, you'd recall that, and the very reason why we've invited the Minister of Police to join us as well, apart from his interest in ensuring that where criminality is uncovered, that he and the police play the role of investigation of possible criminality, the police themselves appear to have been a victim of this systematic fleecing of the state coffers. And therefore they are a significant interested party, maybe not at the with the same enormity in terms of quantum as that of the Department of Health. And it's not necessarily confined to the two departments, we believe, but we think that they are the bigger victims in the scale of things. So basically, in addition to the 56 billion that health alone has incurred, you then have police and other departments. My own departments have been victims as well. We have had instances where at corrections, settlements are made in circumstances where, we have difficulty or matters are allowed to lapse and for the state to lose cases, and you don't know who gets to benefit. So it's a wide-ranging investigation which does not necessarily confine itself to pure financial loss, which is the primary focus, but where there are other forms of losses, those would be pursued and appropriate remedial action taken. The issue of how many investigators, well, he's answered that, but how many lawyers or law firms are affected, etc. We cannot at this stage predict what is going to be uncovered and how many of the law firms that operate in the space will be found in some form or another to have been, active participants here. Until the investigation shows light, and the whole idea really is to leave no stone unturned in the quest to completely eliminating the scourge. So we cannot, sitting here, be able to say definitively how many as such law firms would be affected by this. Thank you very much.
I was hoping that nobody was going to ask me a question.
Yeah, the Minister of Police. There will always be something they want to hear from you.
What your press is one.
Even if it's your voice. Yeah, I think it's fine.
Morning, everybody. I was hoping nobody was going to ask me a question. If I'm directly affected, I'm sure, not me per se. I'm sure we'll talk about the department. Yes, we are double-folded. We are victims and perpetrators. Because there will be some of our members that will really collude and collaborate with these kind of people. And sometimes as you are seated, we were once saved by the very same next minister when you are just there and some guys, they knock on your door to come and collect your cars and everything from the police because you are owing 34 million that you do not know. It's an agreement and settlement which police themselves did not know about it. It's between the suspect, stroke criminal, and the people from the office of the Attorney General.
State attorney.
State attorney, not state. Yeah, state attorney, and you are seated there, and you begin to check, and you find that it's a case that you should be all defending, and a very winnable case. Maybe you find that the partner of the person that has been settled with, the person himself, the matter is still in court. But they rush to settle, and you find that a partner of that person is doing some years, which gives you a possibility that the second one also will be sent there, but you are seated there, is settled. So it's a question, it's an issue that we hope it will be kept. Thanks for this from the President, because as we speak, it happens. But in terms of the amounts, I don't have a full amount, but much less than health. The one I know very well is the suspect, a person that is in court. They settled about 34 million for him. A person that has a clear case that we believe will win, but they go beyond, or they go ahead of dealing with the case in court to settle before even that the court takes decision on the matter. So we are victims. Some of our members are perpetrators, but more than that, we'll have to work hard to make sure that these perpetrators, Minister Motsoaledi, whenever he sees me, he's almost on my neck to say, when are you arresting these people? We did have the meeting this morning, Minister Motsoaledi, with the head of the Hawks on the matters. Indeed, as the Minister of Justice has said, that there might be some criminal charges and elements going forward. Somebody will have to work on the matter. So the Hawks will be more relevant body to take the information or whatever is found to take those things forward. Hence, one has to meet with the head of Fox, and again we're meeting with him at about 12:30 to take these matters forward, because it will be no use of not acting after we've received the information. SIU will deal with their matters, but definitely there are matters that the police will have to deal with, taking the matters forward. It's not just for information for us, it's that after that information we need to act. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I just? Sure. Yeah. Can I add something before they go on with the question? You know, as General Cele is saying, I am quite aggrieved, Minister, and you know that very well, because I want people arrested. As I'm sitting here, I know, as a matter of fact, that there are lawyers, private lawyers in the Eastern Cape who have to be arrested. And my grief is, why is it taking so long? It's taking too long. We need to break these cartels, this network, and we need to break it as soon as possible. The question here was about the quantum numbers, etc. I've mentioned 56 billion in health, and as I'm sitting here, I'm quite sure that not all of it is legitimate, and I'm not saying there are no legitimate cases where something wrong happened. In any healthcare systems, when you arrive in a healthcare center, three things may happen to you. You might experience negligence, you might experience malpractice, but there might also be an adverse event, which nobody has planned. That happens, and I'm not querying that. But we are saying some of these are actually fraudulent. I give an example here to the Sunday Times. About 100 million, out of these 56 billion I've mentioned, I already know as I'm sitting here that there is 100 million which is fraudulent, just by two lawyers. Just by two lawyers, that 100 million. It did not even need police for me to discover. It has got nothing to do with police. It was just me watching and saying, how can one lawyer claim this amount of money? What will have happened? What type of adverse event or negligence will have happened for two lawyers to claim that amount? And I just did it alone and asked them, and they withdrew it. So, Minister, I'm hoping part of this investigation will not only be State Attorney's Office, will also be doctors. Because these two cases I'm talking about, one of them, which I've mentioned, a claim of 70 million rand for a botched circumcision. We subsequently discovered that no circumcision was ever performed. And the lawyers told me that before a lawyer submits a claim, if it's medical, legal, if it's medical, they get a doctor. There must be a doctor who advises them and who writes something. Now, what doctor can support a claim of 70 million against the state for a circumcision that never took place? So that doctor too must be investigated. And I've already submitted that case to the Hawks. The second one was about the cerebral palsy that never existed. Also, there must be a doctor who helped the lawyer to fill up those claims, because the terms they used are quite medical, you know, that there is spastic and all that. Now, what doctor appends their signature to that type of thing? So the investigation will be much broader than just investigating the State Attorney's Office. We investigate the whole network of people who are helping in defrauding the state. And I'm hoping by starting in the State Attorney's Office, it will lead to all these other groups who are involved in this matter. Thank you very much.
Maybe maybe one of the things that Minister Motsoaledi would have touched on relates to the vulnerability of the administration system in government. Issues of proper record keeping, issues of security purity of records, so that there isn't manipulation administratively as a result of collusion. Maybe not even involving the state attorney, as he says, but where the line function department has certain rogue officials who collude with certain rogue practitioners of various types, whether doctors or lawyers or other professionals, in order to create fictitious claims against the state maliciously in order to fleece public coffers. So that is where the wide-ranging nature of this investigation comes in. And just to indicate that the powers of the SIU, and Advocate Mutibi is here, are broad enough to go where the problem is. As I indicated, by way of analogy, the mop and the broom and the feather duster will go anywhere and everywhere where we suspect there is that. And I think it's going to be one of the largest and most wide-ranging investigations that the institution has ever conducted, and that is the significance of this investigation. Thank you. Or maybe just to add that the SIU does many investigations of this kind in all three spheres of government, where abuse is uncovered as a result of collusion, either within government or between government and the private sector. So it is not, just to clarify that point further, limited to investigating abuses within the public sector. It is entitled to go into the private sector where the state has incurred loss as a result of the actions even of private actors.
Thank you, Ministers. I just want to augment on the timeline issue that came up. And I want to emphasize this to you members and to the public, that even before we issue the interim report to the President, it's important to note that where during the investigation we discover that there is a civil recovery that we need to make to recover what's due to the state, we action that there and there. In terms of, as the Minister alluded, in terms of the SIU legislation, SIU has got the powers and the authority to litigate in its own name on behalf of the state institutions, and we action that there and there. We'll obviously include it as part of the interim report that this action has been taken. Where there's evidence of criminality, we also put together the evidentiary material. We refer that for prosecution, and that's where, as the Minister of Police has indicated, that we work closely with the Hawks and we participate. If there's a need for our members to act as witnesses, we ensure that that is taking place. That also does not wait until we issue the interim report, simply because we are agreed that the quicker we take action against the perpetrators, the better. Minister of Justice has added that as one of the outcomes is that if there is an indication that any member of the state institution or state attorney in this case is guilty of misconduct, we again put together the evidentiary material. We refer it to the accounting authority so that disciplinary action can be taken without delay. But there's also important that depending on the profession that we're dealing with,
Here we're dealing with lawyers, we're dealing with attorneys, and the Minister of Health has added that this may also impact on the medical practitioners. So in the process, depending on where the guilt points, we do then refer the members of those professions to their respective regulatory bodies. For state attorney or for the attorneys in general, we'll refer them to the Law Society, and we ensure that we follow up that process. If we are of the view that the person has to be removed from the role of attorneys, we do recommend and we ensure that we present that to the Law Society. We will do that with other various professions, including the doctors. And in the process, if there's a need to improve on the systems of the state attorney or any of the state institutions involved, we do then what we call systemic recommendation. This is nothing more than making recommendations for improvements in the business process. If the business process was defective, how is it that we want to ensure that there's checks and balances in future so that we avoid the irregular settlements that have come forth. So we will have to, as we do the investigation, ensure that we also recommend process improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate. We are 7 minutes away from the end of this briefing. So I will allow the 2 hands that I can see. But let me start with the third hand. Let me start with the 2 hands that and I will end with you. Very briefly, please, 1 question each.
Good morning, Ministers. It's Alex from News 24. My colleague did ask if you please maybe just go into a bit more detail about the modus operandi that's being used in this collusion. I don't know if that was answered sufficiently. Can you just give us an idea? Are they just settling winnable cases? Are they actually throwing these cases? Are they just deliberately lapsing deadlines? How is it exactly that as Minister Motsoaledi said, that this cartel is operating? Thank you.
There's a gentleman who had his hand.
Good afternoon, Alton Simpier from ENCA. On the proclamation at, I think it's number 6, if I'm not mistaken, there is intentional or negligent loss of public money or damage to public property. Can you just explain exactly what this means? What is the basis of this investigation? And Mokoni, if you allow me to please ask a second question. Minister Masuta, can you please tell us how far is the department and the presidency in terms of the appointment of the acting NDPP?
Ministers, it's Barry Bateman again from Eyewitness News. Minister Masuta, I refer to the terms of reference in the proclamation. The one relates to the unlawful appropriation or expenditure of public funds, and my colleague referred to the intentional or negligent loss of public money. Now, I referred to the Constitutional Court finding yesterday that the agreement with Nkosana was an abuse of power. Now, Mr. Nkosana has fingered you as well as being party to that particular agreement. Given the terms of reference here, will your role in that particular agreement form part of the investigation? And further, from setting an example for the officials in the department, should you remain on in your position, considering you have been found to be party to an abuse of power which resulted in the loss of funds, public money? Thank you.
Should I assume that Cape Town does not have a question?
That's correct. No questions from Cape Town.
Thank you very much. I trust Cape Town.
All right. Are we done? All right. No. On the issue of damage to property, maybe the SAU head can elaborate on that, under what circumstances. The nature of the abuses are also amplified in my statement, which I read out, citing examples you've just yourself cited obviously plummeting the state's case deliberately in order to achieve a particular outcome that is adverse, both financially and otherwise, to the state, if that's done deliberately, is one of the things to be probed, because indeed there has been concerns that some of these incidents are just completely inexplicable. Yes, there would be various forms of abuse that would be hopefully uncovered. Let me just indicate that the role of a cabinet member responsible for the administration of justice is to do exactly that, is to ensure that all administrative processes relating to the running of the justice system, either that requires the executive, as in at the level of a minister, to perform, that those are undertaken by that cabinet member. But over and above that, any presidential act that relates to the administration of justice, which the president performs, whether in terms of the Constitution or a law, the administration thereof is performed, or the administrative support thereto is provided by the Minister of Justice. So when the former president, in his wisdom, embarked on a process in which he assigned particular people to perform certain duties on his behalf, that resulted in an agreement entered into effectively between the head of state and the former National Director of Prosecution. Our role was one of administrative support to actualize that. And I think that's the reason you would find that not much turns on our specific involvement in that matter. So, because otherwise, if a Minister of Justice simply refused to provide administrative support in the discharge of the executive responsibilities of a head of state in relation to administration of justice, then you'd effectively be impeding that head of state's ability to perform their duties. So it is a decision that was entered into, or agreement that was entered into effectively between the head of state and the erstwhile NDPP, and whoever was involved in negotiating that agreement, I wasn't party to those negotiations at all. I wasn't privy even as to how those calculations were arrived at. Mine was to provide the administrative support to ensure that that is actually executed. I hope that clarifies the matter. But if you, in your wisdom, feel that I'm not fit to hold this office, I suppose you might want to whisper a word to my boss, and if he agrees with you, you know, it takes just a few minutes for that to be effected. But all I can say is that mine is just to perform my job to the best of my ability, and if others feel that I'm not doing a good job, they're perfectly entitled to be critical of me, and I take no qualms with that. Thank you.
The acting NDP
I will not preempt the President's office in making announcements in that regard. As you are aware, the law does indicate that the President consults with us in respect of certain decisions in this regard. So we would be privy of certain developments, but it would be inappropriate for me to preempt an official statement from the Presidency unless I am given the task to communicate on behalf of that office, at which point I'd be more than happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ministers and Program Director. The question I think that's outstanding at the moment that the Minister indicated that I would comment on or respond to was the one relating to intentional or negligent loss of public money or damage to public property as it is contained in the proclamation. Very often, frequently it happens that as we investigate, we do make findings that the state has lost money based on the negligence of a particular official. In this instance, you would then investigate what the process followed to make the decision should be, that should have been followed. If it has not been followed, you then investigate why. More often, we find that there has been a human error, and the human error based on the negligence that the process was not followed. In that event, then it is obligatory on us to return the finding that there has been a negligence on the part of a particular official and that the money has been lost as a result of that. In this instance, if I were to use an example, if a matter has been referred to a state attorney and the matter is then subject to a court process and there has been a settlement and the matter was not subjected to formal litigation, we would then investigate the circumstances in which it was settled, and then there would be indicators of whether the matter was settled regularly or irregularly. And as part of that, we would then have to investigate whether there has been a negligence on the part of anybody. And if that is so, we are then obligated to return that finding. Once we return that finding and we are satisfied that there is negligence and the loss of money, we then kickstart the civil process to recover what would have been lost to the state. With regard to the possible damage to public property, you would know that by definition property would probably indicate to movable or not, or immovable. It's very infrequent that we find that there would have been damage to immovable property, but it's not uncommon that we find that there would have been destruction of movable property, for example, equipments that belong to the state. So in this event, there could be various numbers of equipments that we would use. We could have used possibly as exhibits to then prove our case, and we find that they have been damaged. And in that case, we do then make the appropriate finding that the state's property has been damaged. But in an unlikely event that an immovable property has been damaged, we will also make that finding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this briefing. We hope to see you next time. And good afternoon. Good morning, Keita.
Good morning.
Ministers, can you just please a quick picture?
it's doing like a straight. No, where is he? Who is here from? The head of Fox has never met.
I haven't met him.